Okay, so this is the lab that I'm going to show you the steps that you need to take to solve it. So the main idea here is that this lab is about internet protocols. We're also dealing with public and private IP addresses in the context of AWS. So the objectives of this lab are going to be to summarize and investigate the customer scenario, analyze the difference between a private and a public IP address, develop a solution to the customer's issue in this lab, and summarize and describe your findings. And this is a group activity. And the approximate time that this lab can take is about 1 hour. So here is the scenario. So your role as a cloud support engineer at Amazon Web Services. During your shift, a customer from a Fortune 500 company requests assistance regarding a networking issue with, within their AWS infrastructure. The following is the email and an attachment regarding their architecture so that we can better understand how they have configured stuff in in their um, in their VPC in this particular case. So it says, hello, cloud support. We currently have one virtual private cloud, or a VPC, with a CIDR range of 10.0.0.0.0 forward slash 16. If you're wondering what that 16 means, it simply means, remember that when we talked about IP addresses, we said that an IP address contains two pieces of information. One is going to be the host, the network, and the other one is going to be the host. Remember also that each one of these numbers separated by periods is referred to as an octet. So what is happening here with this slash 16, it's simply telling you that 8 bits here, 8 bits here in the first octet and 8 bits here on the second octet, they're going to be set aside for the network. In other words, those two numbers will be fixed regardless of whenever you begin to subdivide your VPC that we have here. If you create multiple VPCs, if you create multiple subnets, sorry, those two numbers are going to be fixed for all of your subnets. That's all it means. This forward slash 16 notation simply is telling you what part, how many bits are being used up by the network, and we always count them from left to right. So 8 for the first octet and 8 for the second octet. In this VPC, we have two Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, or Amazon EC2 instances. Instance A and Instance B. Those are the two instances, one single subnet. Even though both are in the same subnet and have the same configurations with AWS resources, Instance A, this one, cannot reach the internet, and Instance B can reach the internet. So one can't, the other can. I think it has something to do with the EC2 instances, but I'm not sure. I also had a question about using a public IP address range such as 12.0.0.0/16 for the VPC that I would like to launch. So they want to launch another VPC, and they would like to use this IP address range. Would that cause any issues? And attached is our architecture for reference. Okay, so first things first, what is the knowledge that we need to have regarding IP addresses when it comes to public and private IP addresses? I'm going to drag here this screen here, this little notepad, this note, and what you can see here is you can see what the private IP addresses are. As I mentioned before, uh, any IP address that starts with a 10 is going to be a private IP address. The other range that is easy to remember is the second one, which in this case would be, it starts with 192, 168. It goes from 0, 0 in the third and fourth quarter octet to 255 and 255. In this case, I'm representing that part that can vary. I'm just representing it with two. Uh, so those octets that can vary, that are going to be part of the host, I'm just representing them with these placeholders. That's all it means. It's not that I'm performing any type of algebra or anything like that. So that's the idea here. So just very quickly, based on this person says that they want to create a VPC and they want to use this IP address range. Any any um, any VPC that you create has to have private IP addresses inside of it. So if you want to create a VPC that starts with 12, the problem with that is that 12 is not part of any of these three ranges that we have here. This would probably work, but the problem is this. If you try to use this, it could probably work. AWS would probably not complain, but you have one problem. This, the 12.0.0.0/16, this is a range of IP addresses that is public. In other words, there are some computers out there on the internet that have this IP address range. What that means is there could be some confusion at some point because you're not supposed to use public IP addresses inside of your VPC. You should only use these ones. So that answers this question right away. And by the way, whenever you create a VPC, the the um, the IP address range that you're going to be using is going to be private, and that customer is confusing terms because the customer is saying, "Oh, I want to use a public range of IP addresses such as this," and then so you can see the problems here. First of all, they're not using the correct private IP address range, and also they're not using they're making they think they're confused. They think that the VPC inside of the VPC the IP addresses that you use are going to be public. No, they're not public. They're going to be private. Okay, so let's continue. But I wanted to clarify this, given that we have this information here, and because it's very important information. Okay, so it seems that one of these computers is not reachable, which is this one, and this other one is reachable. So what we need to do is we need to try to figure out what is happening. Let's see. So one of them cannot. Oh well. Okay. So there is a very important. There is something important here to say. Uh, Let me reread it again. So even though they're in the same subnet, it says instance A cannot reach the internet, and instance B can reach the internet. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but what is happening here is the communication to the EC2 instance is not coming from the outside into these servers. Instead of that, the communication is being initiated or started on the EC2 instances, which is it's something very important to that you need to keep in mind. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to follow the instructions and see how we can solve this problem. There are some restrictions. I'm going to read this. Start the lab again. Let's see. So all of these things you already should be familiar with. Task number one is investigate the customer's environment. Recall that that you previously covered public and IP addresses and CIDRs. Well, we didn't cover CIDRs, but that is the slash something that we just saw a moment ago. We did not cover that, by the way. Um, as you as you go through the lab, think about the differences between public and private IP addresses for task one. For task two, think about the importance of using private IP address ranges rather than public ranges. So this is what I was telling you. The customer was confused. They wanted to use public IP address ranges, but you're not supposed to use um, public IP address ranges. You're supposed to use private ones. If you use a public IP address range, it may work, but then you're going to start having some very weird problems. Remember, the IP address, the private IP addresses are going to be used only for internal communication in between your EC2 instances and any other resources that you may have inside of that VPC. Okay, so now for this lab, you have already checked the AWS architecture and everything is routed and attached correctly. So in other words, what they're telling you is that this subnet has information. That information, I might gonna mention it now, is called a routing table entry. And so in this case, there is a route table and a route table entry that tells this public subnet that if it needs to go out to the internet, it can do it by using this internet gateway. This is kind of like equivalent to uh, your cable modem at home, for instance, which also happens to be a router, because this is kind of like as you can see, it's like a door, it's like a doorway. So this is kind of like a doorway that allows communication to come from the outside into the inside and from the inside to the outside. Um, but that's pretty much what they're telling you that this that this connectivity between the public subnet and the internet is working fine. In other words, the problem is not with having incorrectly having set up the public subnet wrong so that the public subnet doesn't know how to get to the internet. So that's one thing that we don't need to check. Okay, so now you need to access the lab, which I have already done. And the first task is to investigate the customer environment. Um, let me see. Recall that you previously covered public and private IP addresses and CIDRs. Um, yeah, that type of notation is called CIDR notation. Um, as you go through this lab, think about the different types of public and private IP addresses for task 1, and for task 2, think about the importance of using private IP address ranges rather than public ranges. This is the note about the architecture, and it tells us that we don't need everything is working fine with respect to the public subnet configuration. In this scenario, Jess, who is the customer requesting assistance, has two EC2 instances, one in one VPC. Both of those EC2 instances are in one single VPC. Instance A cannot reach the internet, and instance B can, even though they're configured within the same VPC. Currently, the customer's architecture seems sound because one of their instances works. Jess suspects that the instance configuration may be the issue. Something that I have mentioned before is that EC2 instances in a VPC, they will for sure have a private IP address, but they can optionally have a public IP address, okay? So what I'm saying here is the private IP address will always be there, something of this type, and the public one, you have to decide whether you want that EC2 instance to have a public IP address. So it's up to you. Um, and then something important that I must mention here is that for these EC2 instances, to be able to access the internet, to be able to go out the door, they need to have public IP addresses. Okay, that's something that you need to keep in mind. Um, there is going to be another case that we're going to see with private subnets, but those ones cannot go directly to the internet gateway. But that's something that we're going to learn in the next lecture. Okay. She also has a question regarding using a public IP address range for the new VPC and has asked you if you could provide further insight on her question. So you currently have one VPC with the same CIDR block, which is 10.0.0.0/16 with two instances, instance A and instance B, within the same with the same configuration as the customer. With the same configuration as the customer. When troubleshooting networking in AWS, you can apply a troubleshooting method where you start from the top and work your way down, or start from the bottom, or you can wait, and you can work your way up. So you can go from top to bottom, or you can go from bottom all the way to the top to try to figure out what the problem is. You start troubleshooting from the bottom and work your way to the top in layers using an example from the OSI model. So that's the importance of the ISI model, which I mentioned before. At the bottom, at the very bottom of this architecture is the EC2 instance. Although the cloud architecture does not directly translate to the OSI model. The following is an example of how you can how the OSI and cloud relate. So when it comes to layer 7, which was the application layer, this is the one that the user is using an application. It could be a web browser, it could be an email client software such as Microsoft Outlook, something like that. Okay, so this is the application. At layer 6 is the presentation layer, and this is the one that has to do with encoding and decoding. For instance, for the web servers, they need to encode the data, for instance, in HTML, so they can send those web pages in between the server and the client. The session layer, this is the one that the session layer, if you remember, this is where we establish a session. So this is going to be equivalent to the EC2 instances. Next, we have the transport layer, or the flow control, and this is going to be the security group, which is a firewall at the EC2 instance level, and the NACL, which is a firewall at the subnet level. Next, we have layer 3, which is the network layer. Remember, this is where we create the packets of information, packets which contain IP addresses. Remember, this is also related to address the routing, the routing of the packets using the sender and the receiving email address. Okay, so this refers to the packets which contain IP addresses. So in this case, this is in the AWS infrastructure is going to be equivalent to route tables. We don't use routers in AWS. We use something called route tables. We are also dealing with something called the Internet Gateway, which is that the Internet Gateway is this device. This is the one. It's kind of like a door that allows traffic to come in and out of it. That's what it's for. Okay. So it's going to be this, and it also relates to subnets. And layer 2 is the data link. This is the one that's related to the MAC addresses, and this is also going to be kind of similar at this level. It will be the route tables, the internet gateway, and the subnets. And finally, at layer 1, which is the physical layer that has to deal with the physical components that help you transmit the information, uh, it includes the cables, the physical transmission of bits, as well as the voltages required to operate the equipment. And this would be equivalent to regions, availability zones. You don't need to memorize this, by the way, but they're just trying to give you some kind of like some idea as to how to troubleshoot a problem. Okay, for task 1, you gain an understanding of the customer environment and replicate their issue. At the upper right of these instructions, choose the AWS button. That's the one that gave me the management console, which I have opened here in another tab. Once you are in the AWS console, typing EC2. So I am here now on the console, and I'm going to type EC2. And then I type this in. And so let's take a look. Management look. Okay. Okay. Well, it was telling me to search. Well, one way of finding the EC2 instance is to go here, but this is like more. It takes more time. Uh, in this case, it's showing me the recently visited. But if I wanted to do it the long way, it would be you go to compute, and in compute you're going to find EC2 because an EC2 is part of the as a compute related service in AWS. Okay, you're now in the Amazon EC2 dashboard. In the left navigation, you're now in the Amazon EC2 dashboard. In the left navigation menu, choose instances, which is here. This option takes you to the EC2 instances, to the current EC2 instance, which means we have A and B. You should see 2 instances. Those are the ones that I can see. Okay. And next, copy and paste the names and the IP addresses of both instances for future reference in a text editor. Okay, so I need to copy the IP addresses of these devices. Okay, so and then it tells us here. Let me see. So in order to find out those IP addresses, the public and private, for any given instance, in this case, you don't see any information here. The reason why you don't see any information here is because we haven't. Actually, let me compress this one because it's taking up space here. Okay, to give it more space. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select instance A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the public and private IP address. Okay, so let me actually use my note here. So instance A, let's see, let me see. So we need to copy what their private and their public IP address are. Okay. The reason why I'm going to get the private and the public IP address is the following reason. Well, I'm doing troubleshooting, but remember that I told you that if you want an EC2 instance to be able to go out to the internet or receive traffic that comes from the outside to the inside, this EC2 instance and this EC2 instance, they need to have public IP address attached to them. And that is an optional thing. The private IP address, which is from these ranges here, that will an EC2 instance will always have one of those based upon the based upon this IP address range that you selected. Okay, so let me continue. So I'm going to be copying EC2 instance IP addresses. So as you can see, the public IP address of instance A, the one that's selected right now, doesn't have a public IP address. That's a little suspicious. Before anything, let me copy the private IP address. So I have this. And now public, we don't have a public IP address, which as you can imagine is going to be a problem. And then for instance B, we have, let me uncheck this and let me select instance B. As you can see, oh, look at this. Instance B happens to have both a public and a private IP address. So instance B, let me actually first copy the private and let me copy the public. So the public IP address here is going to be this. Okay, and so now we have that information. I don't need to select anything here. I can display this thing here again. Um, so pretty much, yeah, what I just did is showed you that information. Yeah, what they were telling us was that if you needed to find the IP addresses, you can find them here. You can find them here in the details, by the way, just because that's very important information. But another place, another one tab that is more explicitly about networking, it's going to be the networking tab. The details gives us that information simply because the IP addresses are very important. So this is kind of like a summary of whatever is considered to be important. But if you need to take a look at the at that in this particular case at that same information, you can see it tells you what IP address IPv4 it has, what public one. In this case, it doesn't have one. The private, and there are some computers in which you can select to have a IP version 6, but we're not going to learn anything about IPv6. But you can see in this one, it tells you, it gives you all the information related to those EC2 instances. Give me a moment, let me see. Okay, so I got the information that I have. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use SSH to try to connect to the Amazon Linux EC2 instance. Okay. In order to get the IP, in order to get the the, the key pair to be able to access those EC2 instances, I need to go to the details, and then I need to download. Uh, I need to download. I can download the PM key. Remember, I mentioned before with Windows you can use the PM key if you go to the command prompt and you type SSH. Optionally, you can use the PPK. And then if you use the PPK, you make sure to use PuTTY. But I'm going to use this one just because I already explained how to use this in the past. So pretty much what I need to do to try to connect to this instance is I need to type in CMD. Okay, let's see, this is not what I was looking. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to type CMD on my other monitor so then I can. So I typed in CMD uh, in order to find the um, in order to be able to enter the SSH command. So okay. So again, I'm using Windows, but I'm going to use the PM key. My download went to the downloads folder, so I need to type in cd downloads. And this is a Windows system, by the way. So I didn't. It's I typed it in with lowercase d, and it took me to this. This is not case sensitive, by the way, in Windows. And then I need to make sure that that key is in this directory. So what I can do is I can simply say, let me take a look at the PM keys, or remember this is the labs. Some people make a mistake sometimes when they need to type in the name of the labs user key, and sometimes they add an S, sometimes they don't add an S. But let's take a look at this. As you can see, the name of that key is labs plural user. Okay, so that's the key that I need to use. So in order to connect to an EC2 instance, what I need to do is I need to via SSH. I need to do SSH. Oops, let me see. SSH minus I. This is in order to pass the private key because I'm not using a password. So the private key is labs user.pem. Okay, and then the next thing I need to do is what user I want to log in as what user into that EC2 is going to be ec2-user at, and now I need the public address of the first machine that I want to connect to. And in this case, I want to connect to the first machine. Let me see. I want to connect to the first one. But in order to connect to instance A, I need to use the public IP address. And as you can see, I don't have a public IP address for that machine. That's why the person cannot connect to instance A. It is missing the public IP address. Okay, so in that case, that's why I cannot type in anything. It wouldn't make sense that I try to type in the private IP address because this is only meant to be used internally within the subnet. And then by now, my computer communication will have to use the internet to get to that machine. And I'm not able to access private IP addresses. They're meant to be used locally. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try the second machine. So the second one has an IP address, a public IP address, and then I can type this in and hit enter and see what happens. Okay, that's a good indication, so I'm going to say yes for the fingerprint. And as you can see, I was able to access the second machine. So I was able to remote into the second machine. So the reason why this is not working is because instance A lacks a public IP address. Instance B has that IP address, has a public IP address. And then look at this. Whenever I'm connected to this machine, look at this IP address. This looks like an IP address, first of all. Instead of using dots, it uses dashes. But it says 10.0.10.161. That happens to be the private IP address of that machine. So you can see whenever I connect to a machine, whenever I connect remotely to this machine, it tells me what its private IP address is inside of that network. Okay. So pretty much we have found out that the problem in this case is that instance A is missing a public IP address, whereas instance B has the public address, and we can connect to it by using the private key that was used when that machine was launched. And then I also mentioned to you the reason why the customers cannot use the public. They want to use a certain block of IP addresses that are public, and you're not supposed to use public IP addresses for a VPC internal addressing. You're only supposed to use from these ones here. Okay, I hope that this is helpful, just like they do in other YouTube videos. Please like this video if you found it useful, and that's pretty much it for now. Thank you.